The dawn broke over Wildflower, with the reluctance of something that knew what it would illuminate. September light filtered through dust that hung perpetually above Main Street, turning the air itself visible, a golden-brown haze that coated lungs and stung eyes. The town huddled at the base of rust-colored buttes, its buildings a mixture of weathered clapboard and sun-baked adobe, connected by sagging boardwalks that creaked warnings with every footfall. 8 men stood opposite one another across the width of the street, rifles raised. Their breath misted in the cold morning air, small white clouds that dissolved almost instantly. Behind them, curtains twitched in windows. Children's faces appeared and were yanked back by anxious mothers. The metallic sound of hammers being drawn to half-cock punctuated the silence, sharp, final, like the closing of coffin lids. Into this frozen tableau walked a man who carried defiance in the set of his shoulders and a woman in his arms. Wicasa was Lakota, perhaps 35 by white reckoning, though his people measured age differently. His shoulders were broad beneath a faded blue wool shirt, open at the throat to reveal a bone choker, carved beads separated by brass trade discs that caught the weak morning light. His black hair fell past his shoulders, stirred by the wind that never truly stopped in this country. Sun and weather had darkened his skin to the color of oiled leather. A beaded knife sheath rode his left hip. A Colt revolver sat holstered on his right, its wooden grip pale from years of handling. The woman in his arms was Emma Thorne, 23 years old, though at this moment she looked ancient with pain and terribly young with vulnerability. Her dark blonde hair had escaped its braid and hung in dust-caked tangles across Wicasa's forearm. Her calico dress, once a soft cornflower blue, was torn at the shoulder, revealing the white shift beneath both garments stained with dried blood and dirt. Her left cheek was swollen, the skin mottled purple and sickly yellow. Her right ankle was wrapped in strips of fabric that had once been part of her petticoat, bound tight, but already showing dark stains where blood had seeped through. She was conscious. Barely. Her hazel eyes tracked the rifle barrels with mechanical precision, cataloging threats the way she once cataloged freight manifests. Her fingers clutched the fabric of Wicasa's shirt, knuckles white, the grip trembling but refusing to release. Wicasa stopped in the exact center of Main Street, equidistant from the guns on either side. For a long moment, he simply stood there, letting them see her, letting them see what their justice looked like when stripped of courtroom language and civic duty. Then, with deliberate slowness, he shifted Emma's weight to his left arm. She made no sound, though her jaw clenched, and with his right hand, reached into his shirt. Every rifle muzzle tensed, following the movement. A dozen fingers tightened on triggers. But what he drew out was not a weapon. It was a ledger. The book was perhaps 10 inches tall and 7 wide, bound in leather that had faded to the color of dried blood. Its pages were thick with notations, receipts pasted to leaves, survey maps folded between sections. A faded ribbon marker hung from the spine, swaying in the wind. Wicasa lifted it high enough for every man present to see clearly. "This belongs to the law," he said. His voice was flat, unaccented English, spoken with careful precision. "And to the people you beat." A gust of wind caught the ledger's pages, fluttering the pasted receipts and the inked survey plats visible between them. The men with rifles hesitated. Their fear, Wicasa understood, was not of the gun he had not drawn or the knife he had not touched. It was of what those papers proved. From the doorway of a single-story building to the left, a structure with a hand-painted sign reading, "C. Bell, M.D." A woman's voice cut through the tension like a scalpel through infected flesh. "Bring her inside, or she'll lose that ankle, you fool." Dr. Clara Bell was perhaps 45, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe knot and a face that had settled into stern competence. She wore a simple brown dress protected by a canvas apron. Her eyes were the coldest blue Wicasa had ever seen on a white woman winter sky before a killing blizzard. Wicasa pivoted smoothly, turning his back on 4 of the rifles, a calculated risk, and moved toward the clinic. Emma's fingers moved against Wicasa's chest. 2 deliberate taps pressed into the hollow below his collarbone. It was code. A signal they had agreed upon during whispered conferences when silence was safer than speech. 2 taps. I'm here. I'm with you. Still alive. His response was a slight squeeze of his arm around her shoulders, acknowledgement, reassurance, promise, while his eyes never left the rifles aimed at his spine. She's a thief and a liar. A voice called from the right-hand boardwalk. The speaker was a lean man in a wool suit too fine for this hard-scrabble town, with a narrow face and eyes like chips of flint. Silas Mercer, the railroad land agent. She altered freight documents. She conspired with that savage to steal company property. She is injured. Clara Bell snapped, not looking at Mercer, but at the men with rifles. Do you intend to shoot a wounded woman on my doorstep, or are you still civilized enough to let me do my job? For a heartbeat, the balance could have tipped either way. Then a broad-shouldered man with graying red hair stepped forward from the right-hand group. Adam Kellerman, the blacksmith, the town's founder. His right hand hung stiffly at his side, and the fingers slightly curled an old burn injury that had never healed properly. Bring her to the doctor, he said, his gaze fixed on Wicasa, cold and measuring. But you will answer for this. Wicasa said nothing. He carried Emma up the 2 wooden steps to the clinic door. Clara Bell held it open, and as Wicasa crossed the threshold, she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for him to hear. They're planning something worse. Don't let them take her again. The door swung shut. Inside, the air smelled of carbolic acid and dried sage. A narrow examination table occupied the center of the single room. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with brown bottles and instruments that gleamed dully in the lamplight. On the table, Clara said briskly, "Gentle with that ankle." Wicasa laid Emma down with care, his hand steady despite 36 hours without sleep. Emma's eyes fluttered open fully for the first time since he had found her in the dry riverbed before dawn. She focused on his face, her lips moving. He leaned close. "Did you get it?" she whispered. "Yes," he said quietly. "The ledger is safe." Her eyes closed again, relief softening the harsh lines of pain around her mouth. Clara was already cutting away the makeshift bandage on Emma's ankle with surgical scissors. She glanced up at Wicasa. "How bad were they?" "Bad enough," Wicasa said. Deputy Riker led them, 4 others. They used fists and boots. They wanted her to tell them where I had hidden the ledger. "And did she?" "No." Clara's mouth thinned to a hard line. She peeled away the last of the cloth, revealing an ankle so swollen it no longer resembled a human joint. Emma made a small, choked sound. "Sprained at minimum." Clara said, her fingers probing. "Possibly fractured. The cheekbone is intact, but the soft tissue damage is significant." She looked up at Wicasa. "She'll have scars, and she'll walk with a limp." Wicasa's hand clenched, but his voice remained level. "She'll walk. That's what matters." Clara uncorked a bottle of laudanum and measured a careful dose. She supported Emma's head while the younger woman drank, then eased her back down. "She'll sleep soon," Clara said. She turned to face Wicasa. "Now tell me what in blazes you 2 have gotten yourselves into." Wicasa met her gaze steadily. Outside, the sound of boots on boardwalks drifted through the walls. "We found proof," he said quietly. "Proof that the land grants being filed by the railroad are fraudulent. Proof that families, white and Lakota, both are being forced off land they have legal right to. Clara exhaled slowly. And you thought exposing them would make them see reason? I thought, Wicasa said, that the law would care. Clara's laugh was short and bitter. The law's son is whatever Adam Kellerman and the town council say it is. And right now they say you're a horse thief and Emma is a traitor. She glanced at the window. You can't stay here. They'll come for her once the shock wears off. I know, Wicasa said. He looked down at Emma, whose breathing had already begun to slow. Without thinking, he reached out and covered her hand with his own, a gesture so brief and so gentle that Clara almost missed it. But she did not miss it. You care for her, Clara said. It was not a question. Wicasa withdrew his hand and straightened. She risked everything to help me. That deserves protection. That's not what I asked. Wicasa turned to face the doctor, and for a moment the careful mask slipped. We don't have time for this conversation. No, Clara agreed. You don't. She moved to a cabinet and withdrew a small derringer. She handed it to Wicasa. Take it. If they come through that door before I've finished setting her ankle, you'll need more than harsh language. Wicasa checked the loads and slipped the derringer into his belt. Thank you. Thank me by keeping that girl alive. Clara began gathering supplies. Now get out of my light and let me work. Wicasa moved to the window and stood to one side watching the street. The men with rifles had not dispersed. He recognized faces Saul Riker, the deputy, a man whose sense of justice curdled when whiskey found him. 3 of the town council members. And standing slightly apart, arms crossed, Silas Mercer, watching everything with the patience of a man who knew the outcome was already decided. Wicasa's hand rested on the grip of his Colt, and he thought about the ledger tucked in his shirt, about the 2 years he had spent tracking it, about his sister's husband, 2 horses lying dead, because he had dared to demand proof that the land theft was legal. The reckoning had only just begun. Wildflower was never meant to be permanent. It had begun in 1882 as a way station for freight wagons hauling silver ore from the Mesa mines down to the railhead at Clanton, 30 miles south. But Adam Kellerman had seen potential in the cluster of tents and temporary corrals. He had been a blacksmith in Chicago before a factory fire left his right hand twisted and useless for fine work, before his wife died of cholera, before he decided that the West offered a second chance for men willing to build it with their own hands. He had built the first permanent forge in the spring of 1882, a stone structure with a proper chimney and a water trough fed by a spring that never ran dry. Others followed. Within 2 years, Wildflower boasted a general store, a boarding house, a saloon, a land office, and a post office that doubled as a telegraph station. By 1888, the population had reached 143 souls. The railroad had noticed. When the territorial legislature opened land grants for a northern spur line, the surveyors came through marking routes and filing plats. And where surveyors came, land agents followed men like Silas Mercer, who represented interests far wealthier and far less concerned with details like who currently lived on the land. Wicasa had come to Wildflower 4 weeks earlier, riding a paint horse and leading a pack mule loaded with furs. He had not announced himself or his purpose. He simply appeared one morning, set up a modest camp in the cottonwoods by the dry riverbed, and began the quiet, patient work of a man who knew how to wait. He was hunting a ledger. The story behind that hunt went back 2 years to a winter camp where his sister Smallbird's family had made their lodge. The land had been promised to them by the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. It was good land protected from the worst winds with water from snowmelt and game trails running through it. But in the spring of 1886, soldiers had come with a court order claiming the land had been legally purchased by a railroad syndicate. The family had been given 1 week to leave. When Wikasa's brother-in-law, 2 horses, demanded to see the documents proving the purchase, he was told such things were recorded in the Territorial Land Office and were not the concern of squatters. 2 horses refused to leave without seeing documentation. The soldiers gave him 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, Smallbird found him dead in his lodge, his skull crushed by what the territorial marshal later described as an accidental fall. No one was arrested. No investigation was conducted. Smallbird took her 3 children north to live with relatives. Wikasa went looking for the ledger that would prove the purchase was fraudulent. It had taken him 18 months of patient tracking through land offices and whispered conversations with clerks who drank too much and talked too freely. The trail had led him finally to Wildflower, to a land office run by Harold Thorne, who had died of pneumonia the previous winter, and to his daughter Emma, who had inherited both his position and Wikasa suspected his secrets. Emma Thorne was not what Wikasa had expected. She was small-boned and quick-moving, with dark blonde hair she wore in a practical braid and hands that were always ink-stained. She had been partially deaf in her left ear since typhoid fever at age 12, which had made her an exceptional lip reader and observer. She had learned the telegraph trade from her father, and after his death, she had taken over the land office's record-keeping, because no one else could make sense of Harold Thorne's cryptic filing system. She was lonely, though she would never have said so. She was intelligent, though the town valued her more for her penmanship than her mind. And she was haunted by the suspicion that her father had been involved in something deeply wrong. Wikasa had approached her carefully as a trader. He had furs that Clara Bell wanted for winter blankets. He had venison that the boarding house cook would pay cash money for. And he had patience. Their first real conversation happened in the back room of the land office on a Wednesday afternoon in late August. Emma was alone, sorting through papers, frowning at a receipt that made no sense payment for surveying work dated 3 months after the surveyor had died in a mining accident. "Something troubles you," Wikasa had said quietly. Emma had startled and turned. "Just paperwork." "Paperwork that makes you frown like that is not just anything," Wikasa had replied. "I know the look. I have worn it myself." And somehow, in the dusty quiet of that back room, Emma had found herself telling him about the discrepancies she kept finding. The dates that did not align, the signatures that looked traced, the survey maps that showed land boundaries shifting between filings. When she finished, he asked quietly, "Do you know what your father was doing?" "No," Emma had said. "But I think he was trying to feed us. After my mother died when I was 12, the telegraph salary wasn't enough. We were hungry, and then suddenly we weren't, and Father always had money." She looked at Wikasa directly. "I think he took money to alter records, and I think he believed no one would be hurt by it." People were hurt, Wikasa had said without anger, simply as fact. "My family. Others. Land that was ours by treaty was taken because men like your father made the papers say it was legal." Emma had looked at him then and seen not the stereotype of the savage, but a man carrying grief as heavy as her own. "I can't undo what my father did," she had said quietly. "But if there's proof, real proof, I can help you find it." That had been the beginning. Over the following 3 weeks, they had worked together in careful secrecy. Emma knew the land office filing system. Wikasa knew which parcels had been stolen. Together, they cross-referenced bills of sale against freight manifests, survey maps against telegraph logs, payment records against dates. The work was slow, meticulous, done by candlelight in the back room, after hours, or in the livery stable where Wikasa kept his horse. Emma taught him how to read surveyor notations. Wikasa taught her how to tie a proper field bandage when she cut her palm. She brought him coffee. He brought her jerky and showed her how to soften it over steam. They did not speak of connection, but it was there in the way Emma's fingers would steady on his wrist when she was showing him a ledger entry. It was there in the way Wicasa would position himself between her and the door whenever footsteps passed outside. It was there the night when gunfire erupted in the street, a drunken argument turned lethal, and Emma had flinched so hard she knocked over the lantern. Wicasa had caught it before it could spill oil, and when he set it upright, he found Emma pressed against the wall, breathing too fast, her hand over her deaf ear. He had not asked permission. He had simply moved to stand in front of her, blocking the door, a physical barrier between her and whatever was happening outside. And when the gunfire stopped, he had stayed there until her breathing slowed. "Thank you," she had whispered. He had nodded once and returned to the papers. But his hand, when he reached for the next ledger, had been shaking slightly. The ledger they finally found was hidden beneath a false board in the floor of the land office, in a space that could only have been made deliberately. It took them 20 minutes of careful prying with Wicasa's knife to lift it without cracking the wood. Inside was a leather-bound book containing 2 years of transactions documenting systematic land theft across 3 territories. The entries were meticulous, written in Emma's father's hand parcels identified by coordinates, purchase prices listed beside fictional buyers, and most damningly freight bills showing payments for agricultural supplies that were actually crates of dynamite. "They're going to destroy something," Emma had said, her voice hollow. "They're going to blow something up and call it an act of nature so they can claim the land." "Yes," Wicasa had agreed, "and we need to stop them." But stopping them required getting the ledger to someone with power to act a territorial judge in Clanton. Wicasa would ride to Clanton with the evidence. Emma would remain in Wildflower and continue delaying paperwork, buying time for justice to arrive. It was a good plan. It might even have worked. But they had underestimated how closely Mercer was watching. The break came during a town meeting on the evening of September 24th. The council had gathered to discuss the railroad's new water project. Silas Mercer stood at the front beside a surveyor's map pinned to the wall, describing how the dam would be built, how it would ensure Wildflower's prosperity. Emma, standing at the back with a ledger under her arm, a different ledger, one she was supposed to be delivering to Mercer, saw the map and felt her stomach drop. The proposed dam site was at the narrow point of the canyon. Directly downstream were a dozen homesteads, families like Ezekiel Brand and his wife Ruth, who lived on the edge of survival, even in good years. If that earthen dam broke, if someone used dynamite to weaken it during a storm, the resulting flood would wipe out every structure in the lower valley. The land would be declared uninhabitable, and the railroad could purchase the flood-damaged wasteland for pennies. And it was all there in the ledger Emma held. The payments, the dynamite shipments, the surveyor's notes describing controlled flooding scenarios. Emma's hands had begun to shake. She looked across the room and caught Wicasa's eye. He was standing near the door as always. She saw him see the ledger, see her face, and understand. He gave the smallest shake of his head. Not now. Not here. But Silas Mercer had already noticed. He paused mid-sentence and turned his gaze, landing on Emma. "Miss Thorne," he said pleasantly, "you look troubled. Is something wrong with the documents?" Every eye in the room turned to her. Emma's mouth went dry. "No," she managed. "Nothing wrong." "Then perhaps you could bring them forward so we can finalize the contracts tonight," Mercer said. He smiled coldly. Efficiency is the cornerstone of progress, after all. Emma did not move, could not move. Because if she handed over that ledger, Mercer would see the notations she had made in the margins, the cross-references, the circled dates, the damning arithmetic. The silence stretched. Adam Kellerman frowned. "Emma, I need to verify some of the dates before. The dates are correct." Mercer interrupted smoothly. Now please, we're all waiting. Emma made a choice. She turned and ran. She was out the door before anyone could react. Her boots loud on the wooden floor, the ledger clutched to her chest. Behind her, chaos, erupted shouts, chairs scraping Mercer's voice. Stop her. Don't let her leave with those documents. She ran toward the livery stable where they had planned to meet if things went wrong. But she was not fast enough. She was halfway across the street when Riker and 3 other men caught up with her. Hands grabbed her arms, fingers digging into flesh hard enough to bruise. She fought and managed to wrench the ledger free long enough to hurl it sideways into the shadows of an alley. That was when Deputy Saul Riker's fist connected with her cheek. The world exploded into white pain. Emma's head snapped back. She tasted blood. Another blow landed, this time to her ribs. The beating was not long, perhaps 2 minutes, but it was methodical. They wanted information. Where was the Indian hiding? What had she told him? Where were the other documents? Emma, half deaf and disoriented, could not have answered even if she wanted to. The world became shouting voices and sharp impacts, dust and blood. She remembered hitting the ground, her ankle twisting beneath her with a snap of pain. She remembered thinking Wicasa will come. And then darkness. When she woke, she was in the dry riverbed a mile outside of town, half buried in sand that the night wind had blown over her. For one terrible moment, she thought she was dead. Then pain crashed back and she knew she was alive. Emma. The voice came from above. She forced her eyes open and saw Wicasa kneeling beside her. Wicasa. Her voice was a croak. I'm here. His hands moved over her, checking for injuries. I have you. You're safe now. The ledger. I found it. Riker threw it in the alley. Wicasa's hands stilled on her grotesquely swollen ankle. This is going to hurt. He tore strips from her petticoat and began binding the ankle. Emma bit down on her sleeve to keep from screaming, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, Wicasa murmured. Emma, I'm so sorry. Not your fault. Emma gasped. I ran. I knew better. You were brave. I was terrified. Brave and terrified aren't opposites, Wicasa said, finishing the binding. You can't have real courage without fear. He slipped his arms beneath her. We're going back to town. Emma's body went rigid. No. They'll kill you. They'll try. Wicasa agreed, his voice calm. But first they'll have to explain to the whole town why they beat a woman and left her to die. And they'll have to do it while I'm standing there, holding the proof of what they've done. They won't listen. Then Mercer will have to shoot me in front of witnesses, Wicasa said. He looked down at her. Trust me, please. Emma studied his face. Okay, I trust you. He lifted her as gently as he could, but she still gasped. Her fingers dug into his shirt. She fought to stay conscious. Wicasa carried her through the pre-dawn darkness. When they reached Main Street, the men were already there, 8 of them with rifles positioned as if they had been waiting. Wicasa walked into the center of the street, carrying Emma, and let them see what their justice looked like. There was a long silence. Then Clara Bell's voice, "Bring her inside, or she'll lose that ankle, you fool." And Wicasa carried Emma into the clinic as the sun rose over Wildflower, and outside Silas Mercer watched with cold patience. 20 minutes later, after Clara had worked to stabilize Emma and administered laudanum, she opened the clinic door and called out to the men loitering on the boardwalk. I'm moving Miss Thorne to the Brand homestead for recovery. She's showing early signs of infection, possibly blood poisoning, and needs isolation from contamination. Anyone who interferes will be personally responsible for spreading potential sepsis through the town. She held up her hands, visibly smeared with Emma's blood. The sight had a powerful effect. Riker stood up. Mr. Mercer gave explicit orders that she stays here. Mr. Mercer, Clara said with acid precision, is not a physician. I am. And I'm telling you that if Emma Thorne doesn't get proper rest in clean conditions, she will die. Her death will be on your hands, and I will make certain everyone knows it. The mention of death of personal responsibility made several men shift uncomfortably. Riker's face showed conflict, but finally he nodded curtly and moved aside. Wicasa emerged, carrying Emma wrapped in a blanket, so only her pale face was visible. She looked like exactly what Clara had claimed a dangerously ill woman at the edge of death. The walk to the livery felt like walking underwater. Every eye in town was on them. Silas Mercer stood outside the land office, watching with cold calculation. But he did not stop them. At the livery, Wicasa's paint horse waited. Clara helped lift Emma onto the animal's back, then used leather strips to secure her in place. 2 miles northwest, Clara said quietly, pressing a bottle into Wicasa's hand. Follow the dry creek bed. Ruth Brand will help you. She paused. Keep that girl alive. She's one of the few decent people in this town. Wicasa nodded, unable to find adequate words. Then he swung up behind Emma, his arms coming around her to hold the reins, his body a solid support against her back. They rode out of Wildflower at a careful walk. To the watching townspeople, it looked like a mercy journey, nothing more. But in the shadows of the land office, Silas Mercer's eyes narrowed. He turned to the man beside him, a hired gunman named Crouch, brought in from Santa Fe, and said quietly, "Follow them. Don't engage. Just watch. I want to know where they go and who they talk to." Crouch nodded and slipped away silent as smoke. The Brand homestead was a hardscrabble piece of earth, wedged into the fold of low hills where a dry creek carved a seasonal path. The house was a dugout, half buried in the hillside, with thick sod walls and a plank roof covered with earth that sprouted grass in wet seasons. Surrounding the dugout were small fields, scrub corn fighting through alkaline soil, struggling rows of beans and squash, a vegetable garden showing constant battle against drought and rabbits. A chicken coop housed perhaps a dozen hens. A few goats grazed on whatever vegetation they could find. Ruth Brand was hanging laundry when Wicasa and Emma arrived, her hands red from lye soap, her face sun-weathered, despite being only in her 30s. She took one look at Emma's condition and asked no questions. She simply waved them toward the dugout and began preparing a pallet on the floor near the iron stove. "Ezekiel is in the far field," Ruth said as Wicasa carried Emma inside. "He'll be back by sundown. Can she eat anything?" "Broth, if you have it," Wicasa replied, lowering Emma carefully onto the pallet. "And water. She needs water most." Ruth nodded and moved to the stove, where a pot of something sustaining simmered. She ladled out broth and brought it over, kneeling to help Emma drink. Emma managed a few swallows before her stomach rebelled. She lay back, breathing shallowly. "Thank you," she whispered. Ruth's smile was quick and tired. "You helped Ezekiel last spring when he couldn't make sense of the tax forms, spent half a day explaining the calculations, showed him how to file an appeal. We don't forget debts here." Emma's fingers loosened exhaustion and laudanum pulling her under. Ruth covered her with another blanket and stood moving to where Wicasa stood in the doorway, watching the empty landscape. "How bad is it?" she asked quietly. "Bad," Wicasa replied honestly. "Mercer has hired men, professionals. They won't hesitate to kill anyone who gets in their way." Ruth absorbed this with stoic acceptance. "Then we'll be careful, and we'll be ready." She glanced back at Emma. "What is she to you, really?" Wicasa was silent for a long moment. "She's someone who chose to do the right thing when it would have been easier to look away. Someone who's paying a price for that choice that she shouldn't have to pay alone." "That's not what I asked." Ruth said, echoing Clara's earlier observation. Wicasa finally looked at her, and Ruth saw in his eyes something that made her heart ache, the look of a man who had found something precious and was terrified of losing it. "I don't know yet," he said honestly, "but I know I won't let them hurt her again." Ruth nodded slowly. "Then you'd better make sure you survive whatever's coming. Because if you die, she'll do something foolish trying to avenge you, and then we'll all be lost." Ezekiel Brand returned as the sun touched the western horizon, riding a mule that looked as tired as its owner. When his wife explained who was sheltering in their dugout, Ezekiel's first reaction was silence, heavy silence, that spoke of a man weighing survival against conscience. Finally, he walked to where Wicasa stood. "You've put my family at risk." "Yes," Wicasa said, not softening the truth. "I'm sorry for that. Sorry doesn't feed my children if Mercer burns my crops." Ezekiel said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Sorry doesn't protect my wife when hired guns come asking questions." "I know," Wicasa interrupted quietly. "I know what I'm asking. And if there was another way, I would take it. But there isn't. Mercer is planning something that will destroy your land and everyone else's in the lower valley. The dam he's building. It's not meant to help you. It's meant to drown you out." Ezekiel's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Wicasa pulled out the ledger and opened it to a marked page. "Read this. These are the survey calculations for the dam's failure scenarios. Your land is listed as within the primary flood zone. So is the Garrison Place, the Mackenzie Homestead, the Twisted Creek grazing lands. When that dam breaks, and it will break, because Mercer is going to make sure it breaks during the next big storm, everything downstream will be washed away. The railroad will call it a natural disaster. And then they'll buy the land for pennies as flood-damaged wasteland." Ezekiel took the ledger with trembling hands and read slowly. His face, already grim, went gray. "They mean to murder us." "Not directly," Wicasa said. "But yes, that's what it amounts to. Mass displacement that will kill some people and destroy the rest financially." September 1888. Ezekiel closed the ledger and handed it back. He walked to the edge of the property, staring out at his fields, at the rows of stunted corn that represented months of labor, at the vegetable plots his wife tended before dawn, at the tiny pieces of a life built from nothing. It was not much, but it was his. He stood there for perhaps 2 minutes, silent and still. Ruth came out and stood beside him, taking his hand without speaking. Finally, Ezekiel turned back to Wicasa. "What do you need from me?" "Time," Wicasa said. "And help reading the financial sections of the ledger. Emma can decode the survey marks and freight logs, but the banking records are beyond both of us." "I did bookkeeping for a freight company before we came west," Ezekiel said. "I can read financial records, track money flows, identify fraud patterns." He walked forward. "But if we do this, we do it right. No half measures. We get every piece of evidence, document everything, and we get it to someone who can act on it, someone with real power." "Agreed." "Agreed," Wicasa said and extended his hand. They shook, sealing an alliance forged from necessity and shared danger. Ruth watched this exchange, then nodded. "I'll make more food. You'll all need your strength. And I'll pack supplies in case you need to run. Because I have a feeling that running is going to be necessary before this is finished." Inside the dugout, Emma lay on her pallet and listened to the murmur of voices outside. She thought about her father, about the choices he had made. She thought about Wicasa, who had trusted her when he had no reason to. And she thought about Wildflower, built on stolen land, and sustained by lies, about to learn that some debts came due whether you wanted to pay them or not. Outside, the first stars appeared. The temperature dropped quickly, and in the darkness beyond the Brand homestead, a hired gunman named Crouch watched from a rocky outcrop, noting who came and went, calculating angles of approach, preparing a report for Silas Mercer. The next 3 days passed in a blur of careful work and mounting tension. Emma, confined to the pallet with her broken ankle, worked through the ledger page by page with Ezekiel's help, cross-referencing entries against freight manifests and survey notes. Wicasa split his time between guarding the homestead and making careful reconnaissance trips into town, moving at night, watching patterns, listening to conversations. What he learned was not encouraging. Mercer had brought in more hired men, 4 of them hard-eyed and well-armed. They were asking questions about the Brand place, about Emma, about where Wicasa might have hidden additional documents. On the morning of the 3rd day, Ruth shook Wicasa awake before dawn. "Someone is watching the house. North Ridge. Been there since midnight." Wicasa rose silently, checked his weapons, and slipped out through the back of the dugout. He circled wide through the scrub, moving with the patience of a hunter who had learned his trade in country where mistakes were fatal. It took him an hour to get into position above the watcher, a lanky man with a rifle perched behind a rock outcrop, with a clear view of the Brand homestead. Wicasa came up behind him, knife drawn, and pressed the blade to the man's throat just hard enough to draw a bead of blood. "Who sent you?" Wicasa asked quietly. The man froze. "I'm just watching. I haven't done anything." "Who sent you?" Wicasa repeated. A pause. Then, "Mercer. He wants to know where you go, what you're doing." "Tell him," Wicasa said, "that I'm preparing to bury him." He withdrew the knife, grabbed the man's rifle, and shoved him forward. "Now run, and if I see you again, I won't ask questions." The man scrambled down the hillside and disappeared. Wicasa returned to the dugout and told Ezekiel what had happened. "They know we're here," Ezekiel said grimly. "It's only a matter of time before they come in force." "Then we move faster," Wicasa replied. He turned to Emma. "How much more do you need?" Emma looked up from the ledger, her face pale but determined. 2 sections. Freight logs for the dynamite shipments and the financial trail showing who authorized payment. Maybe 6 hours of work. "You have 4, Wicasa said. "After that, we ride for Clanton whether the work is finished or not." Emma nodded and bent back to the pages, her pencil moving rapidly. At mid-morning on the 4th day, Wicasa made a decision that Ezekiel thought was insane, and Emma thought was inevitable. He saddled his paint horse, helped Emma into the saddle despite her protests, and rode straight into Wildflower, not to hide, but to challenge. They arrived at the height of the day's activity. Wicasa dismounted in front of the land office and lifted Emma down, holding her steady as she balanced on her one good leg. Silas Mercer emerged within seconds, flanked by Deputy Riker and 2 of the hired gunmen. His face was a mask of barely controlled fury. "You have considerable nerve," Mercer said, "coming back here after fleeing like a thief." "I'm not a thief," Wicasa replied evenly. "I'm a witness." He reached into his shirt and withdrew the ledger, the copy he had made. "This book contains evidence of fraud, theft, and planned destruction of property. I'm offering it to Mr. Kellerman and the town council so they can see what kind of man they've invited into their town." A crowd was gathering. Adam Kellerman pushed through, his expression thunderous. "What is the meaning of this?" "The meaning," Wicasa said, "is that Silas Mercer has been using your town and your name to steal land across 3 territories, and he plans to destroy homesteads in the lower valley by dynamiting the dam he claims will save you all." A ripple of shock ran through the crowd. Adam's face went very still. Those are serious accusations. They're true accusations, Emma said, her voice carrying despite the pain. The proof is in the ledger. Freight bills showing dynamite purchases, survey notes describing the flood zone, and financial records showing payments authorized by men in territorial government payments that were routed through accounts controlled by Mercer's syndicate. Mercer's smile was cold. You're repeating lies fed to you by a man who has every reason to slander the railroad. His people lost land fair and square, and now he wants revenge. My people, Wicasa said quietly, lost land that was guaranteed by treaty. Your railroad took it using forged documents, and you used Adam Kellerman's blacksmith seal to make the forgeries look legitimate. Adam's head snapped up. What? Wicasa opened the ledger to a marked page and held it out. This survey plat. It's dated March of 1887 and bears your seal. But according to the freight logs, you were in Denver that entire month buying equipment. You couldn't have stamped this document. Adam took the ledger and stared at the page. His face went white. Someone used my seal. Someone who had access to your forge during repairs, Emma said. She looked at Mercer. The land agent, my father. He did your repairs in February of 1887, and he was alone in your shop for 3 days. A long, terrible silence fell over the street. Adam looked from the ledger to Mercer to the crowd, and Wicasa saw the moment when belief shifted, when the blacksmith realized he had been used, manipulated, made complicit in crimes he had never intended. Is this true? Adam asked Mercer, his voice dangerous. It's railroad business, Mercer replied. Not your concern. It's my name on fraudulent documents, Adam said, his voice rising. It's my reputation being used to steal land. That makes it my concern. Mercer's hand moved toward his coat pocket. Wicasa's hand dropped to his Colt faster than thought. The two hired gunmen shifted, rifles rising. For a single breath, the street balanced on the edge of slaughter. Then Ruthie Dorr, the schoolteacher, a slight woman in her 50s who rarely spoke in public, stepped between Wicasa and the guns. She held up a piece of paper, one of the pages from the ledger. This is the council's oath. Ruthie said, her voice shaking but clear. The oath you all swore when you founded this town. To uphold justice, to protect the innocent, and to build a place where law matters more than power. Read it before you shoot, and then decide if you're still the men who wrote those words. The hired gunman hesitated, looking to Mercer for guidance. Adam Kellerman took the paper from Ruthie and read it slowly. His jaw worked. Lower your weapons, he said finally. Mr. Kellerman. Mercer began. You don't understand the full. Lower your weapons. Adam's voice cracked like a whip. The hired gunmen, uncertain, lowered their rifles. The tension did not break. It simply shifted, coiled tighter. Wicasa used the moment to back toward his horse, supporting Emma. We're going to Clara's clinic. Emma needs medical attention. When she's been treated, we'll present the full ledger to the council. If you're honest men, you'll listen. He lifted Emma into the saddle, swung up behind her, and rode slowly down the street toward the clinic. Every step felt like walking through deep water. But no one fired. No one stopped them. As they reached Clara's door, Emma sagged against Wicasa, her strength giving out. He caught her, and in that moment, visible to everyone, his hand moved to cradle the back of her head, a gesture so tender that most of the watching crowd missed it. But Clara, opening the clinic door, did not. And neither did Silas Mercer, whose eyes narrowed with sudden cold understanding. That night, Mercer struck. He sent Riker and 4 men to the Brand homestead, with orders to retrieve any remaining documents and to discourage further interference. But Wicasa had anticipated this. He and Ezekiel had moved the remaining papers to the rail yard, hidden in an empty freight car that sat on a siding. When Riker and his men arrived at the Brand dugout, they found it empty except for Ruth and the children. Ruth, standing in the doorway with a shotgun braced against her hip, informed them that her husband and his associates had gone into town on business. Riker, frustrated and increasingly desperate, ordered a search. They found nothing but turnips and empty coffee cups. By the time Riker reached the rail yard, it was full dark. The freight cars sat in long rose shadows within shadows. Lanterns hung on poles at intervals, casting pools of sickly yellow light. Wicasa and Ezekiel were inside one of the cars, working by the light of a single shuttered lantern, when they heard boots crunching on gravel outside. Wicasa blew out the lantern instantly. They crouched in the darkness, listening. "Check every car." Riker's voice tense. "They're here somewhere." The sound of doors being slid open one after another echoed through the yard. Wicasa touched Ezekiel's arm, a silent signal. They moved to the far end of the car, where a coupling connected their car to the next. Wicasa drew his knife and went to work on the pin, not removing it, but loosening it so it could be yanked free quickly. Footsteps on the gravel outside their car. The door rattled. "This one's locked from the inside." "Then break it open," Riker snapped. The door slammed inward. A man with a lantern stepped up, peering into the darkness. "I see." Wicasa grabbed him by the collar and yanked him inside, slamming him against the wall. The lantern fell shattering, plunging everything into darkness. Shouts erupted. Men piled into the car, swinging fists and clubs blindly. It was chaos. Brutal close quarters fighting in pitch blackness. Wicasa took a blow to the ribs that drove the air from his lungs, but he kept moving, using the confined space to his advantage. He swept a man's legs out from under him, slammed another's head against the wall, grappled with a third until Ezekiel clubbed the man from behind. "Out!" Wicasa hissed. "Now!" They stumbled toward the end of the car. Wicasa yanked the coupling pin free, and the car lurched, beginning to roll backward on the slight grade. Men shouted, losing their balance. Someone fired a shot, the muzzle flash blinding, and the bullet punched through the car's wooden side 6 inches from Ezekiel's head. Wicasa and Ezekiel jumped from the moving car and hit the ground running. Behind them, the uncoupled car rolled backward, blocking the line of sight, buying them seconds. They ran through the maze of freight cars, Wicasa's ribs screaming with each breath. Behind them, Riker was shouting orders, trying to regroup. Then Emma's voice, sharp and urgent. "Here." She was standing in the shadow of a water tower, balanced on one leg, holding a coupling pin in both hands, like a club. When one of Riker's men rounded the corner at a run, she swung and the iron bar connected with his knee with a sound like a branch snapping. The man went down screaming. Wicasa skidded to a stop beside her. "You shouldn't be here." "Too late," Emma said, breathing hard. "Go, I'll slow them down." "No. Go." She raised the coupling pin again as another man appeared. This time she swung for the steel support beam beside him, and the resulting clang was so loud, the man flinched back, giving Wicasa time to grab Emma and pull her into the narrow gap between 2 freight cars. They pressed together in the darkness, bodies aligned, breath mingling. Emma's heartbeat hammered against Wicasa's chest. His arm was around her waist, holding her upright. "Count to 3. He whispered, his lips close to her ear. "Then drop." She nodded against his shoulder. 1. Footsteps running. 2. The footsteps slowed, confused, searching. 3. They dropped into a crouch just as a lantern beam swept over the space where their heads had been. The searcher moved on, and they slipped away through the gap, emerging on the far side of the rail yard. Ezekiel was waiting with the horse. They mounted, all 3 of them, Emma in front, Wicasa, behind Ezekiel clinging to the back, and rode hard for the open country, leaving the rail yard and Riker's curses behind. No one spoke until they were a mile out, hidden in the folds of an arroyo. Then Emma started to laugh, a shaky, half-hysterical sound that might have been a sob. "We're alive," she said as if surprised. "Yes." Wicasa agreed. His ribs felt like they were made of broken glass, but he was smiling despite the pain. "Yes, we are." The final piece of evidence they needed was locked in a box hidden in the old silver mine, the one that had been abandoned when the vein played out 2 years earlier. Emma had seen the land agent hide something there during an inspection. At the time, she had thought nothing of it. Now she suspected it was the original survey documents, the real ones, before they were altered. The mine entrance was a gaping black mouth in the hillside, shored up with timbers that had already begun to rot. A rusted gate hung open, creaking in the wind. "This is a bad idea," Ezekiel said, staring into the darkness. "It's the only idea we have left," Emma replied. She was leaning heavily on a crutch Wicasa had fashioned from a tree branch. "The lockbox is 50 feet and just past the first support beam. I can get it." "You can barely walk," Wicasa said. "Then you'll have to carry me." She looked at him. "Please." Wicasa exhaled slowly. Then he nodded, and they went into the mine. The air inside was cool and damp, smelling of earth and old decay. Wicasa carried a lantern in one hand, his other arm around Emma's waist to support her. Ezekiel followed, carrying a pry bar. The tunnel was narrow, the walls rough-hewn and glistening with seepage. Every few feet, timber beams held up the ceiling, some still solid, others visibly sagging. 50 feet in, they found the lockbox. It was iron, about the size of a bread box, tucked into a crevice and covered with dust and spider webs. Wicasa set Emma down carefully, then reached for the box. A timber groaned. Wicasa froze. Dust rained from the ceiling, pattering onto his shoulders. The groaning continued, a deep, ominous sound, like the mountain itself was shifting. "Out," Ezekiel whispered. "Now." They turned to run, but the ceiling chose that moment to give. A slab of rock the size of a wagon bed cracked free and fell smashing into the tunnel floor 20 feet behind them, cutting off the exit. Dust exploded outward in a choking cloud. Emma coughed, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with panic. Wicasa grabbed her and rolled them sideways into a narrow side chute, just as another slab fell exactly where they had been standing. The world became noise and darkness, and the smell of crushed stone. When the dust finally settled, the tunnel was blocked. The lantern had gone out. They were in absolute darkness. Emma's breathing was coming too fast, the ragged gasps of someone on the edge of panic. Her partial deafness made the echoes disorienting. She couldn't tell which sounds were real and which were reverberations. "Wicasa." Her voice was small, frightened. "Here." His hand found hers in the darkness, and he pressed 2 slow taps against her wrist, then one fast. "I'm here. With you. We're alive." Emma's breathing slowed fractionally. "I can't see." "I know. But we're not trapped. There's air moving. Do you feel it?" She concentrated and after a moment nodded. "Yes. That means there's another way out. We just have to find it." He squeezed her hand, once then let go, and began feeling along the walls of the side chute. It took 20 minutes of blind crawling, Emma dragging her broken ankle, biting her lip to keep from crying out, Wicasa leading by touch alone, before they found the narrow fissure at the back of the chute. It was barely wide enough for a person, and it sloped upward at a steep angle. "Ezekiel," Wicasa called. "Here," came the muffled reply from somewhere nearby. "I'm stuck." They found him wedged between two rocks, his shoulders too broad to fit through the gap that Emma and Wicasa had squeezed past. Together they worked him free, scraping skin and tearing his shirt, but eventually he popped through. The fissure led upward for another 50 feet, the angle so steep they had to climb, bracing against the walls. Emma couldn't use her broken ankle, so Wicasa climbed ahead of her, and she followed by gripping his belt and letting him pull her up, step by painful step. They emerged finally through a crack in the hillside into the blinding brightness of midday sun. All three of them collapsed on the rocky ground, gasping filthy bleeding from a dozen scrapes and cuts. Ezekiel was the first to speak. "We didn't get the lockbox." "No," Wicasa agreed. "But we got something better." He was holding a sheaf of papers, not from the lockbox, but from a leather satchel he had found in the side chute, half buried in rubble. He unfolded one of the pages, and his expression went very still. "What is it?" Emma asked. Wicasa handed her the paper. It was a letter written on heavy paper, with the letterhead of the Territorial Land Office. The handwriting was educated, precise, and the signature at the bottom was unmistakable: Harold Thorne. Emma read it once, then again, her face draining of color. The letter was addressed to a railroad executive and described in meticulous detail how survey documents could be altered to shift land boundaries without arousing suspicion. It included a price list for various services, altering dates, forging signatures, creating entirely fictional transactions. "My father," Emma whispered. "He wasn't just complicit. He was the architect." She looked up at Wicasa, and he saw in her eyes a grief so raw it made his chest ache. "I'm sorry," Wicasa said quietly. Emma shook her head. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing dust and tears together. "No, you have nothing to apologize for. He did this. He made these choices." She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her dress. "And now we make sure it means something." They returned to the Brand homestead as the sun was setting. Ruth met them at the door, her face grave. "Adam Kellerman is here," she said quietly. "He's been waiting for an hour. He wants to talk." Wicasa's hand moved to his Colt. "Alone?" "Alone," Ruth confirmed. "He gave me his word there would be no violence." Wicasa and Emma exchanged a glance. Then Emma nodded. "Let him in." Adam Kellerman was sitting at the rough wooden table in the center of the dugout, his hat in his hands, his damaged right hand resting on the tabletop. He looked older than he had at the town meeting, older and deeply tired. When Emma and Wicasa entered, he stood. "Miss Thorne," he said formally. "Wicasa, thank you for seeing me." "We didn't have much choice," Wicasa replied. "No," Adam agreed. "I suppose not." He gestured to the table. "May I show you something?" Wicasa nodded warily. They sat. Adam reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document, a survey plat yellowed with age. He spread it on the table. "This is the original boundary map for the town of Wildflower," he said. "Filed in 1882 when I first established the forge. Do you see this section?" He pointed to a parcel marked in red ink. This was designated as common grazing land, open to use by anyone passing through: settlers, cattlemen, native hunters. It was one of the conditions of the land grant. Emma leaned forward, studying the map. "I've never seen this version." "No," Adam said, "because it was replaced. 3 years ago, Silas Mercer came to me with a corrected version. He said there had been a clerical error in the original filing, that the common land designation was a mistake. He had a new map with the same boundaries, but different markings. And it had my seal on it." "Which you didn't put there," Wicasa said. "Which I didn't put there," Adam confirmed. At the time, I had no reason to question it. Mercer represented the territorial office. He had credentials, and the change seemed minor, just a reclassification of land use. He paused, his jaw working. But it wasn't minor. That reclassification allowed the railroad to claim the land as abandoned property and file for ownership. And it displaced families who had been grazing cattle there for years. Emma's fingers moved across the map, tracing the boundaries. Then she pulled out the letter they had found in the mine, the one in her father's handwriting, and placed it beside the map. "My father did this," she said quietly. "He created the corrected version. He forged your seal, and he was paid by Mercer to do it." Adam read the letter slowly, his face already pale and ashen. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I'm sorry for your loss and for what this must cost you to reveal." "Don't be sorry for me," Emma said, her voice steady. "Be sorry for the families you helped displace. Be sorry for the people who lost their homes because you trusted the wrong man." Adam flinched, as if struck, but he didn't argue. "You're right," he said. "I was a fool. I believed that civilization and progress were the same thing. I believed that men in positions of authority were acting in good faith." He looked at Wicasa. "Your sister's family, 2 horses. That was one of the parcels taken under the reclassification, wasn't it?" "Yes," Wicasa said. His voice was flat, carefully controlled. "I didn't know," Adam said. "I swear to you I didn't know what was being done in my name." "Not knowing," Wicasa replied, "doesn't undo the harm." "No," Adam agreed. "It doesn't." He stood, his damaged hand trembling slightly. "But perhaps I can help you undo it now. I'll testify. I'll give a sworn statement to a territorial judge that my seal was used without my knowledge or consent, and that Silas Mercer orchestrated the fraud. I'll name names, provide dates, and help you build a case that can't be ignored." Emma looked at Wicasa. He looked back, and in the silence between them, a decision was made. "Why?" Wicasa asked Adam. "Why now? What changed?" Adam was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I saw you carry her into my town. I saw what my deputy did to her under my authority. And I realized that I've been building a lie. I thought I was building a place where law mattered. But law without justice is just tyranny with paperwork." He put his hat back on. "I can't undo what's been done, but I can stop it from happening again." Wicasa stood and extended his hand. Adam looked at it, then clasped it firmly. The handshake was brief, formal, but it carried weight. "There's more," Emma said. She pulled out the second set of documents from the mine, the survey notes and the letter describing the water project. "Mercer isn't just stealing land. He's planning to destroy the homesteads in the lower valley by dynamiting the dam during the next storm. He'll call it a natural disaster, and the railroad will buy the flooded land for nothing." Adam's face hardened. "When?" "Sunday," Wicasa said. "The work train is scheduled to deliver construction materials to the dam site Sunday morning. The weather reports predict heavy rain Saturday night." Adam's jaw clenched. "That's 3 days from now." "Yes." "Then we don't have time to ride to Clanton and back?" Adam said. "We need to stop the dynamiting ourselves, and we need to do it in a way that gives us evidence solid enough to bring federal charges. We need to catch them in the act," Emma said. "Yes," Adam agreed. "But that means someone has to be at the dam site when they light the fuses. And it means the rest of us have to be ready to move fast when it happens." He looked around the table at Emma with her broken ankle, at Wicasa, with his bruised ribs, at Ezekiel, who had risked everything simply by sheltering them. "This is going to be dangerous. People could die. People will die if we do nothing," Ezekiel said quietly. "My children, my neighbors. Maybe even folks in town if the flood hits hard enough. Adam nodded slowly. Then he stood and walked to the door, pausing on the threshold. I'll talk to the council. Not all of them, Mercer has bought too many. But there are a few I trust. We'll put together a plan. He looked back at Wicasa. Can you ride to the dam site tonight and scout it? I need to know the layout, the access points where the dynamite is likely to be placed. I can do that, Wicasa said. Good. Adam's gaze moved to Emma. And you, Miss Thorne, can you finish the ledger work? I need every shred of evidence documented and ready to present. I can do that, Emma replied. Adam nodded once, then left. When he was gone, Ezekiel let out a long breath. Did that just happen? Did Adam Kellerman just switch sides? He didn't switch sides, Wicasa said. He chose one. Finally, Emma was staring at the letter in her father's handwriting. Wicasa moved to her side, kneeling so their eyes were level. You don't have to carry his guilt, he said quietly. I know, Emma replied. But I do have to make sure his mistakes don't destroy anyone else. She looked at Wicasa. If I don't come back from Clanton, you will come back. Wicasa interrupted. If I don't, Emma continued firmly, I need you to promise me something. Promise me you won't let anger make you do something stupid. Promise me you'll see this through to the end, no matter what happens to me. Wicasa's throat tightened. I promise, he said finally. Emma reached out and took his hand, her fingers lacing through his. They sat like that for a long moment, neither speaking, simply drawing strength from the contact. That night, after Ezekiel and Ruth had gone to bed, Emma and Wicasa sat together by the dying fire, working through the last sections of the ledger. Emma's ankle was propped on a folded blanket. She was leaning against the wall, exhausted, but determined to finish. Wicasa sat beside her close enough that their shoulders touched, reading over the freight manifests. The work was tedious, requiring complete focus, but every few minutes, one of them would shift, and the movement would bring them fractionally closer. Finally, Emma set down her pencil and rubbed her eyes. I can't see straight anymore. Then rest, Wicasa said. He reached for the blanket Ruth had left folded nearby and draped it over Emma's shoulders. She pulled it tighter, shivering despite the warmth of the fire. I'm not cold. I'm just tired. Tired of being afraid. Fear isn't weakness, Wicasa said. I know, but I'm tired of it anyway. She turned her head to look at him, and in the dim firelight, her face was soft, vulnerable. Do you ever wish you had just stayed away, that you hadn't come to Wildflower looking for that ledger? No, Wicasa said immediately. Do you wish I had? Emma was silent for a moment, considering. Then she shook her head. No. If you hadn't come, I would still be filing papers for a man who was planning to drown my neighbors. I would still be my father's daughter, pretending I didn't see the truth. She paused. You gave me a reason to fight back. You gave yourself that. Wicasa replied. I was just the excuse. Emma smiled faintly. Then, without quite meaning to, she leaned her head against his shoulder. Wicasa went very still, barely breathing, as if afraid that any movement would break the fragile moment. If we survive this, Emma said quietly, what will you do? Go home, Wicasa said. To my sister. Tell her that the man who killed her husband will face justice. And then, I don't know. He hesitated, then added, what will you do? Leave Wildflower, Emma said. There's nothing left for me here. My father's name is ruined. The town will always see me as either a traitor or a victim. I can't live with either. Where will you go? I don't know. Emma echoed. She lifted her head to look at him, and their faces were very close. Maybe that's all right, not knowing. Wikasa's hand moved to her face, his fingers brushing a strand of hair back from her forehead. The touch was so gentle it made Emma's breath catch. "You deserve to know," he said quietly. "You deserve to have a plan, a future, something certain." "So do you," Emma replied. For a moment they simply looked at each other. Then Emma did something that surprised both of them. She reached up, unfastened the bone choker from around Wikasa's neck, and held it in her palm. "You gave this to me for luck," she said. "But you need it more than I do now. You're the one riding into danger tomorrow." Wikasa shook his head. "Keep it, please." Emma studied his face, reading the emotions he was trying to hide. Then she fastened the choker around her own neck, the carved bone bead settling against her collarbone. "Then we'll share it," she said. "When you come back, you can take it back. Until then, I'll hold on to it for you." Wikasa's hand moved to the choker, his fingers tracing the line of it against her skin. The touch lingered, and Emma closed her eyes, leaning into it. Neither of them spoke the words that hovered between them, unspoken but understood. "I don't want to lose you. I'm afraid of what happens next. I care more than I should." Instead, Wikasa leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers, a gesture of trust and closeness that needed no words. They stayed like that until the fire burned down to embers. But before he moved away, Emma's hand caught his wrist. "Come back," she whispered. "I will," he promised. The storm arrived Saturday night, exactly as predicted. It came in hard and fast, the kind of late-season deluge that turned dry creek beds into torrents. Rain hammered the brand dugout's sod roof, and water began seeping through cracks in the walls. Wikasa had left at dawn to scout the dam site, promising to return by nightfall. But nightfall came and went, and he did not return. Emma sat by the small window, watching the rain sheet down, her anxiety growing with each passing hour. At midnight, the door burst open, and Wikasa stumbled in, soaked to the bone and limping. His left arm was wrapped in a makeshift bandage, and his face was tight with pain. Emma was on her feet instantly, forgetting about her broken ankle and nearly falling before Ruth caught her. "What happened?" "Ran into trouble," Wikasa said shortly. He moved to the stove, peeling off his wet shirt. A deep gash ran along his forearm, still bleeding sluggishly despite the bandage. "Mercer has men at the dam, and 4 of them armed with repeating rifles. They're not construction workers. They're killers." "Did they see you?" Ezekiel asked. "One did. We fought. I got away, but he got a knife in me before I could put him down." Wikasa sat heavily on a stool. "He's dead, which means Mercer knows we're coming." Emma's hands were already moving, unwrapping the sodden bandage and examining the wound. It was deep but clean. She went to the supplies Clara Bell had sent and pulled out carbolic acid needle and thread. "This will hurt," she said. "Everything hurts," Wikasa replied. "Do it." Emma cleaned the wound with carbolic, her hand steady despite the tremor she could feel building inside her. Then she threaded the needle and began stitching. Wikasa did not flinch, though his breathing went shallow, and his good hand clenched into a fist. When she finished, she wrapped the arm in clean cloth and tied it off. "You need rest." "We don't have time for rest," Wikasa said. "Mercer will move the timeline up now that he knows we're onto him. The dynamite could go off tonight." "In this storm," Ruth looked skeptical. "Especially in this storm," Wikasa said. "The rain will make the explosion look like the dam failed naturally." It's the perfect cover. Ezekiel swore under his breath. Then we have to go now. Tonight. We need help, Emma said. We need Adam Kellerman and whoever else he's convinced to stand with us. I'll go, Ezekiel said, reaching for his coat. No. Wakasa stood swaying slightly. You need to stay here. Protect your family. If this goes wrong, Mercer will come after anyone who helped us. He looked at Emma. I'll go into town. I'll find Adam. And I'll bring back enough men to stop this. You can barely stand, Emma said, her voice rising. I can ride. Wakasa replied. Not alone, you can't. Emma grabbed the crutch Ruth had made for her and hobbled toward the door. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. It's not a debate, Emma said flatly. You're injured. You need someone to watch your back, and I'm the only one here who knows the town well enough to find Adam quickly. They glared at each other, stubborn wills colliding. Ruth, watching from the side, shook her head. You're both fools. But she's right. You need her. Wakasa looked like he wanted to argue further, but the pain in his arm and the exhaustion dragging at him made clear thinking difficult. Finally, he nodded curtly. Fine, but you stay on the horse. No heroics. I'm not the one who needs that lecture. Emma shot back. 10 minutes later, they were riding through the storm, Emma seated in front Wakasa, behind her, one arm around her waist to keep her steady. The rain was a solid wall, the darkness absolute. They navigated by memory and instinct. They were halfway there when the first fire bloomed on the horizon, a sullen orange glow that lit the underside of the storm clouds. The Brand Place. Wakasa said, his voice hollow. Emma twisted to look back. No, it's coming from the direction of town. They pushed the horse faster. As they crested the rise above Wildflower, they saw the truth. The freight warehouse was on fire flames, leaping high despite the rain-black smoke billowing into the sky. And in the street, lit by the hellish glow, men were fighting. They rode into chaos. The warehouse fire was spreading sparks carried by the wind to the dry goods store and the saloon. People were running in all directions, some trying to fight the fire with bucket lines, others simply trying to save their possessions. In the center of it all, Deputy Riker and a handful of townsmen were grappling with Mercer's hired guns. Adam Kellerman stood on the steps of the land office shouting orders and trying to organize a response. When he saw Wakasa and Emma ride up, his expression was grim. Mercer started the fire, Adam said without preamble. He figured if we were busy saving the town, we wouldn't have time to stop him at the dam. His men tried to burn out the council members who sided against me. We fought them off, but... He gestured at the spreading flames. We're losing the town. Then we split up, Wakasa said. You take every able-bodied man you can trust and ride for the dam. Emma and I will help with the fire. You're in no shape to fight a fire, Adam said, looking at Wakasa's bandaged arm. And you're in no shape to waste time arguing. Wakasa replied, Go. We'll handle this. Adam hesitated, then nodded. He grabbed 6 men, including, surprisingly, Deputy Riker, who seemed to have finally chosen a side, and rode out into the storm. Wakasa and Emma joined the bucket line. Emma couldn't walk without her crutch, so she positioned herself at the well, hauling up buckets of water and passing them down the line. Wakasa, despite his injury, worked at the front, throwing water onto the flames and dragging smoldering beams away. It was brutal work. The heat was intense, the smoke choking. Wakasa's stitches tore open, blood soaking through the bandage, but he didn't stop. Emma's hands blistered from the rough rope of the well pulley, but she kept hauling buckets, her arms burning with effort. At one point, Clara Bell appeared at Emma's side, her face soot-streaked. I need help at the clinic, Ezekiel's youngest, she breathed smoke. Her lungs are failing. Emma's heart stopped. Ruth brought the children to town. She had no choice. Mercer's men set fire to the homestead. Ruth got everyone out but the girl. Clara shook her head. She's not breathing well. I need you to help me keep her alive. Emma looked at Wicasa, who was still fighting the warehouse fire. He would tell her to go. He would tell her the child was more important. She turned to the woman beside her, Ruthie Dorr, the schoolteacher. Take my place. Don't stop no matter what. Ruthie nodded and took the bucket from Emma's hands. Emma followed Clara to the clinic, moving as fast as her broken ankle would allow. Inside, Ruth Brand was kneeling beside a pallet, where her youngest daughter, a girl of perhaps 5 with tangled blonde hair and a face too pale, lay gasping for breath. The child's lips were tinged blue, her chest heaving. Clara had already laid out her instruments, a scalpel, a length of hollow reed bandages. She looked at Emma. If I have to open her throat to let her breathe, I'll need steady hands to hold her down. Can you do that? Emma's stomach turned, but she nodded. Tell me what to do. For the next hour, while the town burned outside and Wicasa fought fires and men fought men, Emma and Clara fought death. They cleared the child's airway, forced her to cough up black mucus, held her down when she thrashed. Clara didn't have to use the scalpel. The child's lungs began to clear on their own, slowly, agonizingly. But it was close. When the girl finally fell into an exhausted sleep, her breathing still labored, but steady, Ruth Brand collapsed against the wall and wept. Emma sat beside her, her own eyes burning, and held the woman's hand in silence. Outside, the rain intensified, and by some mercy, the fire began to die. By dawn, the warehouse was a charred skeleton, but the rest of the town had been saved. Exhausted men and women sat on boardwalks and in the mud, too tired to move. Wicasa found Emma in the clinic asleep on the floor beside the Brand child's pallet, her blistered hands still clutching a damp rag she had been using to cool the girl's forehead. He knelt beside her and gently shook her shoulder. Emma. She woke instantly, her eyes flying open, scanning for danger. When she saw him, relief flooded her face. You're alive. So are you, he replied. He looked down at her hands, saw the blisters, and something dark moved behind his eyes. You should have stopped. So should you, Emma said, nodding at his arm, where fresh blood had soaked through the bandage. They looked at each other for a moment, and despite the exhaustion and pain, Emma felt something warm uncurl in her chest, hope, fragile and dangerous. Is the girl going to live? Wicasa asked. Clara thinks so, Emma said, but it will be a long recovery. Wicasa nodded. Then he said quietly, Adam and his men rode out hours ago. They should be at the dam by now. Emma's expression shifted, fear replacing relief. Then it's happening. Right now. Yes. They rose together, helping each other stand, and moved to the clinic door. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and cold. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, and from the northwest, carried on the wind, came a sound like distant thunder. Emma's hand found Wicasa's, their fingers laced together, holding tight. We have to go, Emma said. Yes, Wicasa agreed. They went. The work train sat on the narrow trestle bridge that spanned the canyon above the dam site, its engine idling steam, hissing into the cold morning air. A single flat car was loaded with crates marked construction materials. But the men unloading them were not construction workers. They were Mercer's hired guns, and they were working quickly, laying charges along the base of the earthen dam. Adam Kellerman and his 6 men arrived on the ridge above, just as the first fuse was being unrolled. Adam raised his hand, signaling a halt, and the men dismounted, tying their horses in a thicket. We go in quiet, Adam whispered. No shooting unless we have no choice. Our job is to stop them from lighting those fuses, to get proof of what they're doing. Deputy Riker, crouched beside him, nodded. And if they shoot first, then we shoot back, Adam said grimly. But we don't start this fight. They moved down the ridge in a line, using rocks and scrub for cover. The rain had made the ground treacherous, and twice men slipped. They were 50 yards from the dam when one of Mercer's men looked up and saw them. "We got company," the man shouted, reaching for his rifle. "Move," Adam bellowed, and the quiet approach turned into a chaotic rush. Gunfire cracked across the canyon. Adam's men returned fire, but the advantage was with the defenders. Mercer's men had cover behind the flat car, and they had repeating rifles. Adam's group was caught on the open slope. Riker took a bullet in the shoulder and went down. Another man, a farmer named Davies, was hit in the leg. Adam dragged them both behind a boulder. On the train, Silas Mercer stepped out of the engine car, a revolver in his hand and a smile on his face. "You're too late, Kellerman," he called. "Even if you stop me, the railroad will just send someone else. You can't fight progress." "This isn't progress," Adam shouted back. "This is murder." "No," Mercer replied calmly. "This is business." He turned to the man beside him, the one holding the fuse reel, and nodded. The man struck a match. Wicasa and Emma arrived on horseback, just as the match flared. They had ridden hard through the night. They crested the ridge and saw the scene below the train, the dam, the armed men, and Adam's group pinned behind rocks. "We're too late," Emma whispered. "No," Wicasa said. He scanned the canyon. The train was the key. If they could stop the train, they could stop the fuse from reaching the charges. He untied Emma from the saddle and lowered her to the ground. "Stay here. If I don't come back—" "You're coming back," Emma interrupted fiercely. She grabbed his shirt, pulled him down, and kissed him hard and desperate and full of all the words they hadn't said. When she pulled away, her eyes were bright. "You're coming back because I'm not done with you yet." Wicasa's hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "I'm not done with you either," he said quietly. Then he turned and ran down the ridge toward the train. He reached the trestle and began climbing the iron framework, using the crossbeams as ladder rungs. The metal was slick with rain, and twice he nearly lost his grip, but he kept climbing until he reached the level of the flat car. The man with the fuse reel didn't see him until Wicasa vaulted over the side and landed in a crouch. The man reached for his gun, but Wicasa was faster. He drew his knife and threw at the blade, burying itself in the man's shoulder. The man screamed and dropped the fuse reel. But the match had already been lit. The fuse was burning. Wicasa lunged for it, trying to stamp out the flame, but another of Mercer's men tackled him from the side. They went down hard, rolling across the flat car, fists and elbows flying. Wicasa's injured arm screamed, but he used it anyway, driving his elbow into the man's ribs, then his face. The man went limp. Wicasa scrambled to his feet and grabbed the fuse reel, yanking hard to pull it back. But the reel was heavy, and the fuse was already halfway to the dam. On the engine platform, Mercer raised his revolver and fired. The bullet grazed Wicasa's side, a line of fire. He dropped to one knee, his vision graying. And then Adam Kellerman was there, charging up the trestle on foot, his damaged hand useless, but his left hand gripping a pry bar. He swung it at Mercer, who ducked, and the two men grappled on the narrow platform and the canyon yawning beneath them. "You ruined everything," Mercer snarled, trying to bring his gun to bear. "You ruined yourself," Adam shot back. He hooked his leg behind Mercer's and shoved, and both men tumbled off the platform. They fell 10 feet onto the bed of the flat car, the impact driving the air from their lungs. Adam's damaged hand hit the metal edge, and something snapped, bone or tendon, he couldn't tell. But the pain was blinding. He ignored it, focusing on the gun in Mercer's hand. Wicasa, meanwhile, had reached the fuse. It was 6 feet from the first charge, the flame hissing and spitting sparks. He grabbed it bare-handed, ignoring the burn, and yanked. The fuse pulled free of the charge, the burning end dangling harmlessly. But there was a second fuse, one he hadn't seen, and it was already burning. "Wicasa!" Emma's voice carried on the wind from the ridge. She'd seen it from above. Second fuse, left side. Wicasa turned and saw a thin black line snaking across the dam's surface, the flame racing toward a cluster of dynamite crates. He ran, but his injured side slowed him, and the fuse was faster. He was not going to make it. Deputy Saul Riker, lying wounded on the slope above, saw what was about to happen. He saw the fuse burning toward the dynamite. He saw Wicasa running not fast enough. He saw the crates that would destroy not just the dam, but everyone near it when they exploded. And he saw in his mind's eye Emma Thorne's face, swollen and bruised, the face he had helped create when he beat her and left her to die. He saw the faces of Ezekiel Brand's children who would drown if the dam broke. He saw the town he had sworn to protect burning because he had chosen money over duty. Riker stood up, his left arm hanging useless from the shoulder, wound his revolver in his right hand. His vision swam with pain and blood loss, but his hand was steady as he took aim. Not at Wicasa, not at the fuse. At the remaining crates of dynamite stacked on the dam, the ones Mercer's men hadn't yet had time to place. The ones that, if detonated all at once far from the dam's main structure, might save everyone. "Everybody run," Riker said quietly. And he fired. The world turned white. The dynamite detonated all at once, a roar that was felt more than heard, a pressure wave that lifted Wicasa off his feet and threw him backward into the rocks. Emma, watching from the ridge, screamed his name, but the sound was lost in the explosion. The dam cracked, great fissures racing across its surface, but it did not break. The explosion had been too far from the main structure, too poorly aimed to do catastrophic damage. But it was enough to bring down the trestle. The bridge supports weakened by fire, and rain couldn't withstand the concussion. They folded like paper, and the train engine, flat car, and all toppled into the canyon with a scream of twisting metal. Adam Kellerman, still on the flat car, jumped at the last possible second, catching a rock outcrop and clinging to it with his one good hand. The train hit the canyon floor and exploded in a second smaller blast of steam and fire. Riker, standing at the center of the dam where he had fired the shot, was caught in the collapse. The surface beneath his feet gave way, and he fell, disappearing into the roiling water below. By the time the echoes faded, the dam was cracked but holding. The train was wreckage. Mercer was gone, his body somewhere in the wreckage or washed away by the river. And Riker, brave, foolish, broken. Riker was gone too, swept away by the same water that had taken Mercer. Emma and Wicasa lay in the rocks, battered and bruised, but alive. Emma's hands found Wicasa's face, checking for injuries, her fingers trembling. "You're still here," she whispered. "So are you," Wicasa replied. His voice was hoarse, but there was something in it, lightness, relief, maybe even joy. They pulled each other upright, leaning on one another, because neither could stand alone. And as they did, they saw the column of wagons arriving from town, Clara and Ruth and a dozen others spilling out to help. Adam Kellerman was pulled up from the outcrop by 2 farmers. His right hand was ruined, and the tendons torn, the bones cracked, but he was alive. He looked at Wicasa and Emma, and something like respect passed across his face. "You did it," he said. "We all did it," Wicasa replied. The sun rose higher, burning away the last of the storm clouds. And in the growing light, The people of Wildflower began the long work of accounting, counting the living, mourning the dead, and deciding what kind of town they wanted to be. The federal marshals arrived 3 days later, summoned by the affidavits Adam had signed, and the ledger Emma had completed. They interviewed witnesses, examined the wreckage of the train, and arrested 2 of Mercer's surviving hired men. The ledger was entered into evidence. The freight logs, the forged plats, the survey notes, all of it was documented, notarized, and filed with the territorial court. Warrants were issued for 3 territorial officials and a railroad executive. In Wildflower, the town began to rebuild. The warehouse was a loss, but Adam donated materials from his smithy to construct a new one, smaller, simpler, but owned collectively. Ezekiel Brand's homestead was rebuilt with help from neighbors, and his daughter recovered slowly. Clara Bell expanded her clinic using funds from the fines levied against Mercer's backers. She hired an assistant, and for the first time in years, Clara allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't the only thing standing between the town and medical disaster. Adam Kellerman's right hand never recovered. The damage was too extensive. He could no longer work the forge with his former precision. But he found he could still teach, and he took on an apprentice, a young man named Samuel, who had lost his father in the warehouse fire. Adam also stood trial, not for fraud, but for the death of Silas Mercer. The charge was manslaughter. The trial lasted 2 days. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning a verdict of justifiable action in defense of the town. Adam was acquitted, but the weight of what he had done, the choice to let Mercer fall, would stay with him for the rest of his life. Deputy Riker's body was never recovered. The town held a memorial service, and his name was added to a plaque in the cemetery. It read simply, Saul Riker. He chose right in the end. Emma and Wicasa stayed in Wildflower through the worst of the rebuilding. Emma's ankle healed slowly with a permanent limp that Clara warned would worsen in cold weather. But Emma found she didn't mind. The limp was a reminder not of what had been done to her, but of what she had survived. She moved into a small room above the new general store, which the owner let her rent in exchange for bookkeeping work. It was not much, but it was hers. Wicasa camped in the cottonwoods as he always had, but now he was a regular visitor to town. He helped with construction work, taught several boys how to track and hunt, and quietly ensured that the boundaries of the new grazing lands were marked fairly. And every evening when the day's work was done, he and Emma would meet by the dry riverbed and walk together slowly because of her ankle, but steadily talking about the day, the town, the future. They didn't speak about what came next. Not yet. But the silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who had earned the right to simply exist in each other's presence. One evening, about 3 weeks after the explosion, Emma and Wicasa sat on the bank of the riverbed, watching the sun set. The air was cool, the sky streaked with orange and pink. Emma had brought a basket of bread and cheese from the boarding house, and they shared it in quiet companionship. "I've been thinking," Emma said finally. "About," Wicasa prompted. "About what happens when you leave," Emma said. She kept her eyes on the horizon. "You said you'd go north to your sister, to tell her about 2 horses." "Yes," Wicasa said. "I will." When Wicasa was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "When you can ride with me." Emma's head turned sharply. "What?" "I'm not leaving without you." Wicasa said simply, "You said you wanted to leave Wildflower, so we leave. Together." Emma stared at him, her heart pounding. "You want me to come with you?" "Yes." "To Lakota territory, where white people." She faltered, the enormity of what he was offering sinking in. "Where you'll be a guest," Wicasa said. "Where my sister will welcome you because I welcome you." where you can help build something new if you want, or simply rest if that's what you need. He paused. I'm not asking you to give up who you are. I'm asking if you want to find out who you could be. Emma's throat tightened. What if I don't fit? What if? Late winter, 1889. You'll fit, Wicasa interrupted gently, because you're brave and smart and you care about things that matter. And because... He stopped, the words catching. Because, Emma prompted, her voice barely a whisper. Wicasa reached out and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. Because I want you there, he said. Not as a debt repaid or a burden shouldered, but because when I imagine the future, you're in it. And I don't want to imagine it any other way. Emma felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back and squeezed his hand. I want that too, she said. I've wanted it for a while. I was just afraid to say it. Fear isn't weakness. Wicasa reminded her, echoing the words he had said weeks ago. No, Emma agreed. But I'm tired of it anyway. They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, the sky darkening from pink to purple to deep blue. And when the first stars appeared, Wicasa unfastened the bone choker from around Emma's neck, the one she had worn since the night before the explosion, and held it in his palm. You said I could take this back when I came back, he said. You did come back, Emma replied. So did you. Wicasa tied the choker around his own neck, the bone bead settling against his throat. Then he reached into his shirt and withdrew a thin, braided cord Lakota work made from deer sinew and dyed with plant colors, strong and flexible. He tied it around Emma's wrist. So will you, he said quietly. Emma looked down at the cord, her fingers tracing the intricate braiding. Then she looked up at Wicasa, and her smile was the first truly unguarded one he had seen from her. Yes, she said, I will. They kissed, then slow and deliberate, a promise sealed not with words, but with touch. And when they finally pulled apart, the night had fully settled, the stars bright overhead. Emma and Wicasa left Wildflower on a cold morning in early November, riding north with the first snow dusting the Red Rock Buttes. They traveled light bedroll supplies for 2 weeks, and the ledger sealed in oilcloth and carried in Wicasa's saddlebag as proof to present to the territorial judge in Clanton. The ride to Clanton took 3 days. They sheltered one night under an overhang during a flash flood, pressed together for warmth under a single blanket. Wicasa's injured side ached, and Emma's ankle throbbed with the cold, but neither complained. On the second night, camped beside a spring, Emma asked, What will your sister think of me? She'll think you're brave, Wicasa replied, and stubborn, and that I'm fortunate. And what do you think? Emma asked. Wicasa looked at her across the fire. I think you're the reason I'm still alive. And I think I would very much like to see what we build together, if you're willing. Emma smiled. I'm willing. The territorial judge in Clanton was a woman named Margaret Hayes, known for her ruthless fairness. She accepted the ledger, the affidavits, and the witness statements, then spent 6 hours reviewing every page. When she finally looked up, her expression was grim. This is enough to bring federal charges against 4 territorial officials, a railroad executive, and at least a dozen land agents. The fraud spans 3 territories and involves theft of over 200,000 acres. She looked at Wicasa. You've done the government a service, and you've earned restitution. I don't want money, Wicasa said. I want the land returned, to the families it was stolen from, white and Lakota both. Judge Hayes nodded slowly. That will take time. Years, probably. The courts move slowly, and the railroad will fight every step. But I'll issue an injunction halting all further land seizures in the affected territories pending investigation. And I'll personally recommend that the federal government honor the original treaties and return the stolen parcels. It was not a victory. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Wicasa and Emma left Clanton with copies of the judge's orders. They rode north into Lakota country and reached Wicasa's sister's camp as the first heavy snows began to fall. Wicasa's sister, Small Bird, was a woman of perhaps 40 with gray, threading through her black hair and a face that had weathered grief without breaking. When Wicasa rode into camp with a white woman at his side, Small Bird's first reaction was suspicion. But when Wicasa explained haltingly in Lakota what Emma had done, what she had risked, and why he had brought her, Small Bird's expression softened. She stepped forward, took Emma's hands in hers, and spoke in careful English. "You helped my brother. You honored my husband's memory. You are welcome here." Emma, who had been braced for rejection, felt tears spill over. "Thank you," she whispered. Small Bird smiled a small, sad expression. "Don't thank me yet. Winter is hard here and the people are wary of outsiders. You will have to prove yourself. But," she glanced at Wicasa, and her smile widened fractionally, "I think you will manage." Emma did manage. Over the following months, she learned the rhythms of the camp, how to repair lodge coverings, how to preserve meat, how to read weather signs. She taught several children to read English using a battered primer she had brought from Wildflower. She helped Small Bird with the endless work of survival. And she learned what it meant to be part of a community that valued contribution over status skill, over appearance, and loyalty over law. Wicasa, for his part, found a piece he hadn't known he was missing. He hunted, he traded, he helped resolve disputes. And every night he returned to the lodge he shared with Emma, and they sat together by the fire, talking or silent, simply existing in the presence they had built together. In the spring, a letter arrived, via a traveling trader. It was from Adam Kellerman. "Miss Thorne and Wicasa. The territorial court has upheld Judge Hayes's injunction. The railroad has been ordered to cease all land acquisitions pending review. Several officials have been arrested. The fight isn't over, but we're winning. I also write to inform you of a discovery made by Ruthie Dorr while sorting through Harold Thorne's effects. Among his papers was a notarized deed for a parcel of land north of Wildflower, approximately 160 acres designated as common grazing land. The deed was titled to E. Thorne and Associates, dated 5 years ago. Ruthie believes it was your father's attempt to create a safeguard, a piece of land that couldn't be easily stolen or sold. With your permission, the town council would like to formalize this parcel as shared grazing land, open to use by homesteaders and by Lakota families traveling through the territory. We believe this is what your father intended, and we believe it honors both his memory and the work you and Wicasa did to expose the fraud. Please send word if you approve. Respectfully, Adam Kellerman." Emma read the letter twice, then handed it to Wicasa. He read it in silence. "What do you think?" Emma asked. "I think," Wicasa said slowly, "that your father tried to make amends. And I think this is a good use of the land." Emma nodded. "Then we tell Adam yes." They sent a reply with the next trader heading south, and by summer word came back that the grazing land had been formalized. The territorial judge had signed the order, and boundary stones had been set marked with both English and Lakota symbols. It was a small thing, 160 acres in a territory of millions. But it was a beginning. A place where two communities could meet without suspicion, where children could grow up seeing each other as neighbors rather than enemies. And it carried Harold Thorne's name not as a mark of shame, but as a reminder that even flawed people could leave something good behind if they tried. Emma and Wicasa did not return to Wildflower. There was no need. Their lives were here now, building something that was neither white nor Lakota, but something new, something that belonged to both of them. They were not married, not in the way white settlers understood marriage, or the way Lakota traditions dictated. But they were bound in the way that mattered by choice, by trust, by the shared understanding that they had fought too hard to be together to let anything separate them now. On a warm evening in late summer, they sat together on the hillside above the camp watching the sun set over the Badlands. Emma's wrist bore the braided cord Wicasa had given her, faded now from sun and work, but still strong. Wicasa's throat bore the bone choker repaired where it had cracked during the explosion. "Do you ever regret it?" Wicasa asked. "Leaving your old life?" Emma considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "I regret what my father did. I regret that people were hurt. But I don't regret choosing this." She gestured at the camp of the people moving below the open sky. "This is real. It's hard and uncertain, but it's real. And I would rather have something real and difficult than something easy and false." Wicasa reached over and took her hand. "Then we've chosen well." "Yes," Emma agreed. "We have." They sat in silence as the stars began to appear one by one, bright against the deepening blue. And in the camp below, Small Bird looked up at the hillside, saw the silhouettes of her brother and the woman who had become part of their family, and smiled. The future was uncertain. The fight for justice was far from over. But tonight they had this a moment of peace, hard-won and precious. And sometimes that was enough.